Hello, I'm Estelle Matthews and welcome to Food for Thought, the show that invites thought leaders and experts from the food industry to share their insights on sustainability. Meeting the needs of today without compromising the needs of tomorrow brings its own challenges, questions and opportunities. But putting people and planet at the heart of the food industry is essential for a sustainable world and business.
You're going to see a real gradual phasing out of these type of first-party sustainability claims because they're going to want verifiable, provable, third-party verified claims on these products.
You've got the likes of the retailers who have implemented their AI-driven software around consumer habits. So actually what is being sold on the shelves and how quickly is that being sold?
Social media is a great way for companies to create brand loyalty, to communicate directly with the consumer about what they're doing, to represent their philosophies, their policies, procedures via stories and vignettes that are able to really bring to life the policies that they have in place and the change that it makes in the world.
This series, we've heard from people from all areas of food retail and grocery who've been making strides in sustainability, leading change from the front and inspiring others to do so. And what a fascinating series it's been. We've discussed what's being done to balance sustainability with keeping what we consume safe. Learned about forever chemicals and their impact on our water systems, food and drink. We've also explored new ways of protecting planet health with technology and artificial intelligence. Got an insider's view on the opportunities that getting ahead of regulatory trends can bring. And discussed the top challenges food companies need to overcome to keep their sustainability targets on track. Today, we welcome back NSF's Lisa Spicker and Katie Glover to discuss what's still relevant, what further changes we've seen, and what are the most important learnings companies need to be focusing on in 2025 when it comes to sustainability. Lisa, Katie, welcome back. Let's start with just a general chat on where we're at. Tell me, what have been the big moments or changes in 2024 regarding sustainability? Lisa, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think it's been a really exciting year globally, looking at what's happened on the regulatory level of sustainability. There's all sorts of, especially in the European Union, quite a variety of different regulations that have been starting to roll out, including the first reports according to the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. So that's quite exciting. And then, of course, you've seen some adjustments in anticipated regulations as well. So we've got a bit of a year delay on the EU's deforestation regulation. And certainly we've had some pushback in the United States on the Security and Exchange Commission's climate reporting regulation as well.
Lovely. So from your point of view, Katie, what would you like to summarise by way of where we're at the start of 2025?
Yeah, so I think for us, NSF conducted a study towards the end of last year, which really gave us a great overview in terms of what consumers are wanting out of labels. And actually, although clean labelling and the healthy labels has been something that's been around for a long time, actually, the information we found from our survey showed that 70% of the UK adults are wanting clearer labelling, and actually 74% of those aged 18 to 34 are wanting environmental impact scores, which, had we have done that study perhaps 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, those figures would have been slightly different.
And what do you put this down to? Is it kind of growing awareness? What are the trends that you're seeing?
I think there is a lot to do in terms of the growing the awareness. We know social media plays a huge part in everybody's lives these days. So actually, if you're seeing something on social media, you're wanting to understand it a little bit more. You're wanting to understand what it is that you're actually eating and what you're consuming. So, everybody's trying to find, how they can live a healthier lifestyle, particularly post-COVID.
And of course, thrown into the mix will be their kind of willingness to pay more and actually responding by active participation. Let's go back now to speak to you, Lisa, about this. Any other thoughts about how people are responding to change from a personal point of view?
I think that consumers continue to want to understand if they have responsible products, if they're buying responsible products, and what are companies doing to ensure that there are responsible products. Katie mentioned labeling and regulatory, and you're certainly seeing this come up with a variety of different sustainability certifications and claims that are out there. But then going back to that regulatory piece, you see, for example, the EU Green Claims Directive really trying to put a little bit more teeth into the claims that are being made on pack. So you're going to see a real gradual phasing out of these type of first-party sustainability claims on products, because they're going to want verifiable, provable, third-party verified claims on these products. And what's interesting is you also see consumers wanting more information, generally speaking, as a trend about the different sustainability traits that their products have versus, kind of scaled back, streamlined messaging around product claims and product traits. Today's consumer is really interested in knowing as much as they can know about, again, what they're consuming. And, is it looking at deforestation? Is it looking at human rights? Is it protecting those things in the world? So that's been an interesting development.
Very much so. So what we're hearing is consumers are making considered purchases, which is partly driving change. So let's bring it back to where we're at in terms of regulatory change. Bringing you in again here, if we can, Katie. We've discussed in a previous episode why getting ahead of regulatory change is so important. Are there any new regulations you've seen that have changed the landscape over the last year?
So I think throughout 2024, there wasn't that much that was significantly brought in that would change the landscape. However, there is things on the horizon that are coming in over the next few years that I think Lisa's already touched on. The EU Green Claims Directive, which we're anticipating to be fairly big in terms of the requirements, and actually that is going to have a huge impact on any business that either currently sells products that has sustainability claims on, or perhaps they're looking to sell products that have sustainability claims on. It's very apparent that the consumers are wanting more transparency, and they're wanting to understand what goes into those food products, and actually, where does those ingredients come from? So, people are wanting to learn about, not just the information that's on the product, but even further back, they're wanting to understand the farm to the fork situation more than ever.
And do you find, Lisa, that people are responding to any regulatory change that's out there? I mean, how do you see it from your perspective?
I think you certainly see a reaction on the business side. I think that full probably impact and visibility to some of those regulations are still to play out in the consumer space. To a certain degree, I think as consumers understand the larger amount of options that they have with regards to verifications, reporting, and claims that they should be concerned about, that also sparks a little bit more of that demand. So I think we can probably count on the consumer demand for this increasing as they're learning more about what these regulations are putting into place. And businesses definitely are working on getting those building blocks in place in their organizations to be able to have good database reporting with solid data behind the different, claims that they're supporting, the regulations that they're going to be complying with, and so on.
What would you say consumers are telling us they want with regard to sustainability going into 2025? And what's the research actually telling us? How do we move this forward?
The different types of claims and background that consumers increasingly are showing a desire for is to understand how are people impacted in the supply chain. So the companies that are producing the products, and then their supply chain partners that are, creating all of the ingredients, maybe farming the ingredients, what's happening all the way back to the farm, like Katie was saying. You certainly see more and more desire to understand about that. Deforestation, as I mentioned, not to be a broken record, but that really is a big piece. So people are wanting to understand, are they contributing to deforestation? Climate signature is another really big piece. How much embedded carbon is in the products that they are consuming? And is there an opportunity to both reduce carbon impacts while maybe sourcing products that aren't contributing as much to deforestation? So you're seeing the consumer beginning to link towards or link together these different considerations, and really demanding that reporting is clear from companies and credible and verifiable in these areas.
So we're looking really at a shift in also the business implications. And Katie, it's quite interesting what we're hearing so far, that, integration of climate, nature and social impact. Consumers are expecting businesses now to adopt holistic approaches and address environmental issues. How is that balance working? We know, people are getting more savvy. The consumer is getting more savvy, but they understand the business implications as well. Is that something you're aware of?
Yeah, so I think from a business perspective, they're definitely getting a lot more pressure to ensure that what is on pack is correct. And as Lisa says, it's verified that the information actually provided to consumer makes sense. I think a lot of people, our studies found that only 29% of UK adults actually believe that the information on pack was correct, which is such a low figure when you think about, what I do day in and day out. And I know that everything that goes onto those labels has to be verified and it's not allowed into shops if it isn't. So actually to hear statistics like that in the year 2024 and 2025 means that there's still a huge gap between what the consumers are expecting and actually what's being put onto products, and equally the knowledge that's being given to consumers to be able to buy that. So, being able to provide them perhaps with additional information through the aids of technology, whether that's QR codes because it doesn't quite fit on the packaging. It's, having media campaigns from companies that explain it to a level that everybody can understand and not a level that goes above and beyond what actually the everyday general consumer can take in and consider.
I would just have to add on to that. It's so critical, that piece of the consumer education. And something that's really challenging, I think, in today's environment and sustainability world is this, sustainability is also evolving in real time. What do we need to be concerned about? What was a concern yesterday is no longer a concern today, or it's evolved into a new concern. So trying to keep that machine going of consumer education to know the direction in which we all need to go is, it really needs to try to keep pace with all these new developments, the new science, and frankly, all the certifications and verifications have that same struggle to try to keep up with that evolving science and our understanding of what it's like to live in this circular world or this interconnected world where ideally circular systems and more circularity in our economy, which I would say is another trend that we're seeing continuing to have a lot of uptick. That's really important, and we need to try to move towards that. So what does that look like? How do you prove it? That's a real challenge in consumer education, the science and the certifications, and keeping it all linked and accurate.
And I suppose part of that education of the consumers is also demanding transparency and authenticity. So consumers are expecting brands to provide honest and data-backed sustainability claims now. Are people really believing in the sustainability claims and believing in the transparency and authenticity of businesses now? Do you think that's improving? And let's ask you, Katie.
I'm not sure whether it's improving. I think that businesses are being held more accountable for when things aren't accurate and aren't correct. And we know that, 1 minute, if something is put on social media, it can absolutely blow up. Just before Christmas, we saw a UK company who had changed a product in their animal feed, and that then resonated across the whole of the UK and beyond in terms of what was actually being put into their product, and it was boycotting that company. And for about a week prior to Christmas, I imagine there was a lot of people sat there just wondering how the lead up to Christmas was going to go, and a lot of hours to be put into that. And actually, the local governing bodies in the UK put some information out around actually what that ingredient was and the risks, and that it actually was accepted into the EU and there was no issues and for this company using it. And in fact, a lot of companies out there do, but that really was a showcase of, something exciting that the company was announcing, and actually to be turned into what it was, which was nothing more than a media frenzy. And it was just crazy how quickly it blew up. So I think it's really for businesses to understand that, they're going to be caught out if they're not abiding by the right regulations and the right rules and following actually that what they're giving to consumers is accurate. By no means does that mean that everybody out there is giving accurate information, because we're still not to that point. And if we were, then there'd be a lot of people that would be out of jobs if things were working and were going well. But, essentially it really is, leaning on the businesses to provide that accurate information and hoping that they're being honest.
So you've kind of moved us on nicely to social media and the impact thereof. So how is the rise of social media and the next generations asking difficult questions? And this is going to drive positive change, but also that there is a kind of evolutionary period to plough through first of all. Lisa, what are your thoughts?
I mean, the rise of social media, or social media has risen. I mean, it's there, right? It's well on its arc at the top of the bell curve of being very important as a way to reach your consumer and as a way that can really make or break people's careers, people's businesses, their entire reputations that they've taken decades to build, right? And you see continued efforts, as they should have, on the part of businesses to really connect with their consumer, whether it's, not even Facebook anymore. It doesn't even count anymore. Instagram, probably still TikTok and beyond, right? Like there's always going to be that new social media platform that's really reaching and speaking to the format that the new generation likes to learn in, likes to connect via, right? So you're definitely seeing that evolution. And one thing I want to comment on with the social media related to the last question and trust and reporting. I mean, it's one thing to put a report in front of the European Union and upload it into the portal and have all your data verified with a third-party verifier. But I don't think a lot of consumers are going to go on to the digitally tagged reports being uploaded there and, be making that assessment themselves. Social media is a great way for companies to create brand loyalty, to communicate directly with the consumer about what they're doing, to represent their philosophies, their policies, procedures via stories and vignettes that are able to really bring to life the policies that they have in place and the change that it makes in the world. And of course, some infographics about impacts and all that, I think also really helps. And yeah, that continues to be extremely important for companies' success really with their consumer and loyalty in the sustainability space.
Really interesting. It is also a little challenging to think about the misinformation that might be out there. How can regulation help that? How does that kind of support what the less than positive side of social media, if you like?
Yeah, I mean there are social media platforms out there that aren't particularly regulated, which obviously means that people can advertise and they can say what they like, and there can be advertisements from companies on there that are perhaps selling products or trying to sell products that maybe shouldn't be sold in countries or shouldn't be sold as they're suggested. So I think that's obviously one area that needs to be tackled. And I know from an EU perspective, there's things that are happening and things going on in the background that governments are looking at to see how we can do it. From a UK perspective, we had the HFSS regulations come into place, which sort of started coming into place a couple of years ago, and they're still rolling that out. But that's all around advertising, and actually, that's advertising in stores, that's advertising on TVs after 9 o'clock, and they're really trying to regulate what is shown to particularly the very young generation. What's on after 9 o'clock can only be cannot be shown before 9 o'clock. So there's definitely changes that are happening. Whether they're happening at the rate that it should be, I'm not entirely sure, certainly from a UK perspective.
And it depends on the country you're in too, right? Like there'll be some countries where certain claims that are made or advertisements are way more regulated. Pretty consistently, I think you see a lot of great actions being taken in UK, European Union. You also see in the United States some echoes of that happening. For example, the SEC greenhouse gas reporting directive, for lack of a better word, that was going to be implemented, had a lot of lobbying against it and a lot of comments put against it. And that's really been rolled back quite a bit. And that's also not uncommon. So what might be really required from a regulatory perspective with a lot of protection around that in other areas and regions, countries, aren't necessarily the same in others.
And from a global perspective, do you think the awareness obviously changes per country, per continent? And so how many consumers do you think are actually experiencing the disruptive impacts of climate change? And are we focusing more on Europe and the US, or have you done any studies that show that kind of consumers are more aware in particular areas of the world? And how do you react and support the regulation that you offer for this?
The areas that we've done research in, which is the US, UK and Belgium, so they're sort of countries that we started in, and actually there seems to be very little difference between what the consumers are actually asking for. So in terms of, whether they're wanting more information around sustainability, around processed ingredients, the differences that we saw was actually more generational, in terms of actually the younger generation are the ones that are asking for more of this information and more clarity around this information. So there was a clear disparity between that. But in terms of what we saw from our research from those three countries, everybody's almost asking for the same information as a consumer.
Lisa?
I think that, that's some great background on like numbers and research and, just from the actual perspective of, well, what impacts are we seeing from climate change or other sustainability factors? in the supply chain against our consumers or for our consumers. I think you're definitely seeing that. I don't know about you all, but right now we've got all sorts of egg supply shortages in the United States. The shelves are just wiped clean. And I think that, and, everybody's got signs up saying that, we're working our hardest to continue to provide you with eggs at the right price. But I think you've seen a lot of pressures related to avian flu, right, and other factors that there's certainly some information out there pointing that to a certain degree, changing climates does contribute to that and can proliferate it. So you're seeing it there. You're seeing it sometimes in the increasing of prices as companies have to change where they're sourcing their ingredients because climate change is perhaps negatively impacting areas that previously could grow a crop. And it takes a long time to establish new suppliers and establish even new crops and new farming systems in parts of the world that didn't used to produce that kind of a product, but now it does because of climate change. So it's a huge shift, and you can see delays in product supply and pricing as we are seeing now.
And Lisa, you think that the consumer is linking the lack of supply with the climate change story?
I think Katie has the better statistics there on that linkage. I think that consumers who are already paying attention to the sustainability story have got some of that background. But I do think that it's on probably the businesses ultimately to try to make sure that communication gets out there. I think consumers are interested in hearing what brands that they like, that they're loyal to, the challenges they're facing and learning from them versus maybe having a subscription to Science Now and learning about it from that perspective.
And just picking up on that trust building element that we heard Katie mention, do you think that with increased scrutiny on green claims, brands must focus kind of on credibility and third party verification to actually keep building on that consumer trust?
As a general rule, I would say yes. Third-party certification and verification systems greatly reduces the risk that claims that are being stated are inaccurate. I mean, we've got a lot of third-party certifications out there. There's a reason that they exist. Companies aren't going to pay for them if the consumer doesn't want them and isn't demanding them. And it comes down to the ROI. It's really as simple as that.
Great. Well, let's move on to now the kind of huge strides that we've seen over the last year or so in technology and especially AI. So, Katie, bringing you in here, what are your reflections on how this has or is enabling more sustainable production and products and practices ongoing now in 2025?
Yeah, so I think three of the main things when you're looking at the link from sort of AI and sustainability and the consumers is that there's the optimizing of the supply chain management. So actually they're streamlining operations in the factory and on farms where companies are able to use AI-driven machinery. So as an example, on the farms, they can detect soil moisture levels so they can determine, when is the right time to pick that crop. And actually that's reducing the amount of waste that they had been creating previously. So these things aren't new. They haven't been just invented last year. They've been around for a while. You've also got things that enable manufacturing sites to understand the perishable items and actually try and have a look at their stock inventory to move that around so they're wasting less at food manufacturers. And then you've got the likes of the retailers who have implemented their AI-driven software around consumer habits. So actually what is being sold on the shelves and how quickly is that being sold? And also, what are the consumer trends that they can start to put products in that people are actually wanting? So, in the UK, we're all very, very familiar with our Nectar cards or perhaps, your Tesco cards, depending on where you shop. That all enables the retailers to actually gather this information to be able to use it to ensure that what they're giving the consumers is what they're asking for.
So what about you, Lisa? What are you seeing that stands out for you in terms of tech or AI?
I've been enjoying seeing how AI is being utilized to help scrape information off of the web and other sources to help companies understand what their food carbon footprint might look like or their product carbon footprint that they have. So when you're trying to look at life cycle and life cycle assessments related to your products, we're seeing that really come into play a lot more in that software. And you're seeing some similar applications of AI as well in greenhouse gas software and helping facilitate and make those calculations more accurate and being able to start taking into consideration more regional considerations and variables versus some of the more static emissions factors and data that was utilized in the past for greenhouse gas calculations.
So interesting. And companies are increasingly facing the need to adapt their regulatory approach in response to changing views on climate change and sustainability. What external impacts are affecting people's attitude to this, and how would you suggest we need to respond?
Well, certainly always ever-evolving science, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, is one of those external factors. We can think we have the best new product or ingredient in the world, and then we can find out that it's having adverse effects. I mean, there's infinite number of examples in our past of, oh, this will be a great product. No, it actually causes cancer. I think that in the sustainability world, and the analysis that I've performed, at least here in the United States, is that sustainability, though it perhaps is not going to be as strongly regulated as it might have appeared a handful of years ago or even a few months ago, it is here to stay from the perspective that consumers want it, other countries in the world want it outside of the United States, for example, and those factors aren't going to change. Businesses still need to be aware of who their end consumer is. So that's something to keep in mind. And the fact that whether a person, admits to climate change or not, thinks climate change is real or not, it really doesn't change the fact that, especially for food companies, it's going to be really obvious if their farmers can't produce their ingredients at the same level of quality or volume due to changing weather patterns. And companies, really need to continue to do climate risk assessments or begin those if they haven't done it already. And we should say weather itself is an external factor, right? That needs to continue to be monitored, especially in the food and beverage industry.
That is a really good place to end this episode. There we have it. We've reached the end of our first series. I'd like to say a big thank you to all our guests for their expertise and insights, and to you for tuning in. If you've missed any episodes or simply want to listen again, you'll find the whole of this season on your favourite podcast platforms. Now it's time for us to take a short break, but do give us a follow and we'll be back later in the year for season 2, where we plan to take a deeper dive into one of the most listened to topics of the series, chemicals of concern in the food industry. We look forward to seeing you then for more Food for Thought.
The speaker views are their own and may not necessarily reflect the views of NSF or any of its affiliates.